Right, the chrome that I painted on by hand from a previous update with the little cake pot. I've left it 2 days to dry, and it's blended in really well. You can hardly tell that I've painted it on by hand. I haven't sealed it yet. I've got to seal it later, but I've actually done a bit of extra construction. Right, so the box from step 28, this is step 29, where you glue that extra box on. Now, that box houses the tubing, and this is tubing T4. It's 104mm length, but you gotta just have the one piece, and it's gonna have two ends. So you wrap that inside there, then you glue number 74 cap inside there to hold that into place, and then you glue that box onto the side of that box. Remember that box I sprayed in the Halford's clear lacquer? It's got a mounting hole there and a mounting hole inside the box that mounts onto those two little pegs. So you glue that into place. Now this tubing here with the two ends, it says 104mm, but it was actually too long. I think it probably should have been about 84mm. So on the spark plugs on the side of the engine, I put the one bit of tubing on with a bit of super glue, pulled it round to that spark plug, cut it just a bit too long, probably about a mil too long, and then mounted it onto the spark plug with the super glue, and that bit's done. Then came 30, I've still got to do them pipes. I've glued them together, but I've got to chrome them. Step 31, you've got this like circular assembly, which is 80, and you've got this like circular box assembly, which is 79. That's black, that's silver. So that's one assembly glued together. The second assembly, which is step 32, is 81, which is like an engine component cap cover and like an L-shaped rod with a little notch on it, and that's got to be for some tubing as well. So turning the page over, going over to step 35, where you glue those two assemblies on. So turning the bike round, that's the two assemblies. So that one there is step 31, and you glue that. There's like a hole in there, like a semicircle hole, and that mounts right into the back of the main engine part with a semicircle tab. But the hole inside there, I had to widen to get that to go on. So once that was widened, I pushed that into place, let that dry for a couple of hours, and then step 32, inside the actual cap assembly, there's like a square, like a rectangular notch there and a rectangular notch there. The trouble is, it wouldn't mount onto that hole. So on the step 32 assembly, I cut the two notches off, the rectangular notches, and sanded them down, and that fit on there perfect. So I'll put the glue on there, and then that little circular section there, there's a little hole and there's a little tab on part 31, and you just glue that onto there. Once that was dry, then it came to the tubing that leads from the engine up to that box. So again, turning that back over again, you've got a couple of that tubing. Tells you what to measure it the size as. I think it was 63mm both sides, both bits of tubing. So there's a notch there on the back of the engine, so you glue those into place, and then you bring them up, and you remember that cap that reacted with the Umbral satin coat. Well, I pulled that tube up, glued it into that notch with the super glue, then put the cap on, and then with my tweezers, gripping the tube, I had to bend it slightly and maneuver it onto the little notch that's underneath there, and push that onto place, and then glue that with the super glue. Very difficult indeed. Now you've got this little flappy one here, this little flappy tubing. Now that goes from the back of the engine, tells you what to cut it as. I can't remember what the length was. I think it was 205 actually, 205 mil. There's a notch there and there's a notch on the front bit there. So again, getting the tweezers and pushing those into place on top of the super glue. And those two bits of tubing, that one there mounts onto the fuel tank once that goes on, and this one here, this long one, that'll mount onto the handlebars once I put those into place. So these two little tubings are reminding me of the rigging on the Titanic. They're all loose and all over the place. But they have to be done, because if you don't do them, it's going to be awkward to put them on. So that's where I'm sitting at the moment. Next part of construction is going to be step 30 with exhaust pipes. So I've got 76 and 75 glued together, and then you've got 78 and 77 glued together. So there's the 78 and 77 assembly. Still got to do a touch of seam work, but the 76 and 75 I decided to test fit underneath the engine and onto the frame. So I'm just going to pause this a sec so I can get to the next part of the instructions. Actually, the instructions are on the same page. So there's your 76 and 75 assembly. Now it tells you to put it in downwards onto, there's a little, underneath there there's a little T-tab, and on the frame there's a T-tab hole shape, which is right underneath there. Any problem being, the engine is that close to the frame, I struggled to get it in. I had to pull down the frame slightly and manoeuvre it in, pushing that side in, then pushing that side in, and just wiggling it in. The trouble is I can't get it out, and I haven't even painted it yet, so I decided not to rebend that to get it out again. So I've just glued that into place, and I'm going to have to paint on with the chrome by hand for that piece. And then the 78 and 77 will actually connect into the 76 and 75 piece, and then that will lead up into the bottom of the engine, because there's two holes in the bottom of the engine. There's one here and there's one here. Turning the pages over, I've got some more exhaust assemblies. So you got 92 and 93 with a 94 cap. So that's that piece. Then you got 97 and 98. That's got to be glued together, which is that. And then you got 96 and 95, which is that piece there. I've still got to do the seams. But as you know, when I primer these, the primer brings up the seams a hell of a lot better than the bare plastic. And then you got this little hose section here that's mounted into 96, as it says on the plans. So these have got to be chrome, and that 96 has got to be black. So there's all my exhaust pieces. Like I said, seaming. I've just got to sand the seam down, and then we'll be ready to be painted in the chrome. I've now put all the exhaust tubes, they're outside. I'll give them a quick spray with a primer once I'd sanded the seams down, and they're now outside with the chrome paint on, so I'm just waiting for them to dry. Now I'm dealing with the rear fender, which is 88 for that part and 89 for that part. And there's my completed fender. Now on the plans, it's telling me that these two grooves there, which is that groove, and that groove, have got to mount onto those two pins there. You got one there and you got one here. And basically, I'm not going to do it now, but what you have to do is you have to push that all the way down there, which was a very tight fit. And eventually, the pins lock into their channels. I managed to get it back out again. But what it's telling me to put the 88 in first and then glue 89 on the back once it's around them 2 pins. But the only trouble is, if I do that, I'm going to have a massive, massive long seam. And when I test fitted that, I pushed it all the way down. These 2 bits on the end of the extender arms will actually squeeze out. So I can actually glue that on first, which I've done, and then pull them out slightly and then get them to fit in there. So what I've done is I've glued that on. I put tape there, a strip of tape there, a strip of tape on the other side there. I put 2 strips of tape there. I'm not going to do anything with that because you're not going to see it anyway. So I put a load of glue on the inside to strengthen it. And I took the tape away. The seam was horrible. The seam was absolutely horrible. So I sanded that down with a combination of the sticks, my little sanding sticks, and a bit of sanding paper on my finger just to get in there. So I just got to re-primer this. There's probably going to be a little seam line here and probably a little seam line here. But according to the plans, the decal should cover them up. It was just that main top seam on the top lip. So I've took care of that. So I've just got to re-primer this and then see how the seams show after. But don't do what it says on the plans. Push that down and glue that on. No way, I'm not going to do that. I've now re-primered the rear fender well after doing all that sanding to get rid of that line. On this side here, just above my finger, there's a little bit of a line, nothing too major. I mean, the decal will cover that up. And on this side as well, tiny bit of a line, but again on this side the decal will cover that up. It's just mainly that bit there, and it's come out really well with the sanding, and the primer's covered up all where I'd sanded all off. And as broken Matt Hardy would say, wonderful! So all I've got to do now is just spray this in the gloss black.